in some limited areas. I think that picking up normal social cues, normal sense of humor, he did not have. It was odd.
This awkward genius was also in Russia looking for love. One way he tries to find it is through an agency for so-called mail-order brides. It's how he first meets Nina Sharonova, a 24-year-old doctor, in April 1998.
Everybody who ever met her always said that she was just the kind of person that would walk into a room and would immediately command your attention.
She was a petite woman. She was very pretty. She had a quiet voice. She had a really great laugh. And I really liked her.
Within a year, Nina gets pregnant. The couple marries and moves to Oakland, California.
They moved here to be together, and they looked like they were in love and looked like they were having fun.
By 2003, they have 2 children, 4-year-old Rory and 2-year-old Nio. But despite outward appearances, their relationship is not a happy one.
Hans became jealous of Nina's ability to build friends and build a network outside of himself. Hans wanted Hans to be the only friend that Nina had.
Hans is still spending several months at a time in Russia, and it finally takes a toll. During one trip, Nina begins an affair with his best friend. When Hans finds out, the marriage collapses.
Nina eventually filed for a divorce and moved out. They fought about everything. They fought over the money, they fought over the children.
Even after they split, a bitter custody battle continues for almost 2 years.
The main thing that started up this craziness between them was that Hans was addicted to video games. He would play video games for hours on end. That was fine with Nina, but he wanted Rory to be doing that with him. He felt that a boy needs to become a warrior and a hero, and that American boys are cowardly.
Bolstered by his belief that he is superior to everyone, Hans constantly belittles and undermines all those involved with the children's care, their school, their doctor, even the judge hearing the custody case. As a result, Nina wins sole custody of both Rory and Nio. Hans can't even see them without her approval. By the summer of 2006, Hans's company is struggling, and he has moved in with his mother. His life seems to be falling apart, while Nina, free of her antisocial ex-husband, appears to be thriving. She even has a new boyfriend.
She was happy with him. He and his children and Nina and her children got along very well. I went on camping trips and spent a lot of time together, and she was really excited about that.
In the last week of August 2006, Hans begs Nina to let her children stay with him over the upcoming Labor Day holiday. She reluctantly agrees, but only for part of the 3-day weekend. Sunday, September 3rd. On her way to Hans's house, Nina stops to buy groceries at this supermarket in Berkeley, California. Security cameras capture her with the children at about 1:30 p.m. It will be the last time she is seen in public. Just half an hour later, she disappears.
At that point, the only information we had was that Nina went to the house where Hans lived, dropped the children off, and we knew the children were safe because they were with Hans, and Nina had completely vanished.
2 days later, Nina doesn't pick the children up after school. A friend takes them home and calls the Oakland police. The case is assigned to the Missing Persons Bureau, who quickly make it a top priority.
People that go missing don't plan for the future. Going to the grocery store, dropping our children off, making plans to go eat with people. They just say goodbye to everybody and they go missing. In this case, Nina was planning for the future, so it was very suspicious.
It just didn't make sense that this woman would have just got up and vanished, leaving her kids behind, not knowing what was going to happen to them. Just sort of threw them up in the air and just let them go. It just didn't make any sense.
An extensive search for Nina is officially launched. The starting point is the last place she was seen alive, Hans Reiser's house. Could Nina have run away, or is something much more sinister at play?
I thought, this is really strange. I hope this isn't a murder case.
Nina Reiser has vanished after dropping her 2 children off with their father, Hans, for the weekend. 1 week later, police locate her minivan, parked on a street near Hans Reiser's house.
Inside Nina's van, we had some pretty important discoveries. She had bought some groceries, and those groceries were now rotting in the back of her van. Also inside the van was a cell phone. The battery was removed from Nina's phone, and the phone was flipped open. That's a tactic that people have learned from television will prevent law enforcement from doing GPS tracking.
The contents of the van suggest foul play, so detectives look again at who might want to hurt Nina. Top of the list is her ex-husband. By now, the story has hit the local news, but Hans Reiser still isn't talking.
Hans, why aren't you talking to police?
Hans was acting like the epitome of a suspect. He didn't want to cooperate at all. Nobody wants to look like a homicide suspect when they are possibly a homicide suspect.
Increasingly concerned that Hans is involved in Nina's disappearance, Gil assigns a surveillance team to watch his every move. They report that, strangely, Hans is driving his mother's car. His own car, a Honda CRX, is missing. Hans also seems to know that he is being followed and employs amateur tactics to shake off the tail.
They were telling me that he was entering and exiting the freeway repeatedly, that he was driving into residential neighborhoods. At one point, he went to a local coffee shop and got some coffee and a newspaper and sat there and held the newspaper like he was reading it, but instead was looking up and down the street.
Hans essentially changed his entire life after Nina went missing. And absolutely at no time, even though everybody else that knew Nina and loved Nina, and even those that didn't, people that were just concerned, were trying to find Nina, Hans never did anything, ever. Not even a phone call, not a search, nothing to help find the mother of his children.
After days of increasingly suspicious behavior, Hans leads the surveillance team straight to a crucial piece of evidence.
Ultimately, police officers followed him to his Honda CRX that he had hidden and that we had been looking for.
The right front passenger seat was completely missing. It was gone, with the bolts just laying there on the floor.
The carpeting was completely covered in water, like somebody had tried to hose out whatever was on that side of the car.
Despite Hans's apparent attempt to clean the car, he leaves behind a pile of possessions.
There was a sleeping bag stuff sack, and on the stuff sack there was a 1-inch by 3-inch square that had a blood stain on it.
Gil gets a warrant for Hans's DNA to see if it matches the blood stain. And 5 weeks after Nina was last seen, the surveillance team arrests Hans Reiser. The arrest includes a routine body search. Police are stunned by what they find.
He was wearing a fanny pack at that time. Inside the fanny pack was a passport, about $9,000 in cash. Most strikingly, I think, was his cell phone was also in his fanny pack, and his battery on his cell phone had also been disconnected and physically removed, just like Nina's had been.
At minimum, the evidence suggests Hans is about to flee the country, but it's hardly a smoking gun. With no solid proof of a crime, and with Hans as uncooperative as ever, Gil is forced to release him.
He continued to kind of carry himself as a more intelligent individual than all of us out there. All of our questions were answered with questions. He just seemed pretty indifferent to the entire thing.
Police regroup and consider the evidence in hand. Now they have 2 phones with the batteries removed and 2 abandoned vehicles recovered from Hans's neighborhood. They also have the blood-stained stuff sack. Hans's DNA test proves it is his blood, but further testing reveals Nina's blood is mixed with it. It's enough to get a search warrant for Hans's house. Gil calls in a team of forensic experts to go through it with a fine-tooth comb.
It took 2 days to do the search. They actually located a small spot of blood on a pillar right inside the entryway door of the house, and that was later determined to be Nina Reiser's blood.
There is still one missing piece of the puzzle, Nina herself. Prosecutors still don't have a body to prove she's really dead. Although the case is entirely circumstantial, Hans Reiser is charged with murder, and prosecutors prepare for trial.
I thought I was in big trouble, actually.
November 7th, 2007, the murder trial of Hans Reiser begins. Detective Gil knows it will be a monumental task to prove he's a killer.
I knew that Hans had murdered Nina. I was absolutely convinced. But there's always that, what if the jury doesn't understand the dynamics of the case, or how convoluted the case is, or what if there's just so much evidence that the jury's not able to put the pieces together.
The judge bans cameras from the courtroom, but allows a sketch artist to document the entire trial. After Hora presents his theory that Nina is dead, Hans Reiser's attorney, William Dubois, offers the jury an alternative vision, that Nina is still alive.
There was always this possibility I had to eliminate, that she didn't just take off, get fed up, and run away. So it was one of those things that scared me as a prosecutor. Hey, I better be able to prove Nina's not in Russia.
Dubois tries to paint a picture of Nina as a deceitful adulteress who only married Hans to gain U.S. citizenship. In all likelihood, she is in Russia now with her mother and her children.
Nina's mother had come over to the United States, had been given permission to take the kids back to Russia for Christmas vacation, and she never brought them back.
I was hoping that she wasn't dead. But that would have been such an elaborate con that she was playing on him, and there would be no reason for that. It just didn't, it made no sense.
Just after opening statements, the prosecution unveils its star witness, Hans and Nina's son, Rory, now 8 years old. Heeding Paul Hora's pleas, his grandmother brought him back to the U.S. He is the first person to take the stand.
His testimony was phenomenal. In fact, when he showed up to meet me the day before his testimony, he had drawn a picture that he said to me was a picture of Hans carrying a bag down the stairs in the middle of the night. And he thought that Nina was maybe inside the bag. I had asked him at one point, what do you miss about your mother, Rory? And he said, everything. I haven't seen my mom for, a year and a half, and I don't know where she is, and she doesn't call me on my birthdays, and she's gone. I mean, it was just really powerful testimony.
For 3 months, District Attorney Hora lays out his case in meticulous detail. He presents a mountain of evidence to suggest Nina is dead. The minivan, the rotting groceries, the bloodstains in Hans' house and car, and the simple fact that no one has seen her in more than a year. He also tells the jury that Hans had strong motive, how his infatuation with Nina turned to hatred, and his outrage over losing control of the children.
Nina had sole legal custody, and Hans had no legal custody, which means he was cut out of the loop of making decisions about the health, education, or welfare for his kids. That drove him nuts. I think that's why he killed Nina, because he thought she was going to ruin Rory.
But the heart of the prosecution's case is Hans's own extremely suspicious conduct. In the aftermath of Nina's disappearance, he behaved like the very model of a murder suspect. The epic trial drags on into 2008 as the defense presents its own stack of evidence. They claim that Nina embezzled from Hans's software company, where she worked as a part-time bookkeeper. They call witnesses who suggest Nina was poisoning the kids against their father. Above all, they try to show that Hans is no criminal, just a socially inept geek. Almost everybody who knows him testifies that his weird behavior is simply the result of an unorthodox mind and a massive superiority complex. As if to prove that point, Hans ignores the advice of his lawyers. and takes the stand himself.
He was on the stand for 11 days, just digging his own grave, I think.
On trial for the murder of his ex-wife, Hans Reiser takes the stand in his own defense. Convinced he can outsmart the court, Hans has an explanation for everything. He removed the passenger seat from his car, for example, because he thought it would make it comfortable for sleeping. He was trying to avoid the police surveillance team because he assumed they were corrupt and trying to frame him. As for his passport and the $9,000 found in his stuff sack, he dismisses it as, quote, random debris.
He was on the stand for 11 days, just digging his own grave, I think.
Hans gives a seemingly endless stream of rambling, argumentative answers. He contradicts himself over and over, even apologizing at one point for suggesting the police were corrupt.
He was a miserable witness. When Hans was finished with direct examination, in other words, when his lawyer was finished questioning him, I knew he was toast. I mean, I knew he had done himself in without me even asking a single question. He was that bad.
After nearly 6 months of trial, the case goes to the jury.
I think I was pretty stressed out when it went to the jury's hands. I didn't want that guy getting out of jail. I wanted Hans to be locked away forever.
On April 28, 2008, after 3 days of jury deliberation, the judge allows cameras into court to hear the verdict.
We, the jury, in the above entitled cause, find the defendant, Hans Reiser, guilty of a murder. We, the jury, fix the degree of the above offense as murder of the first degree.
I had all sorts of emotions when he was found guilty. I was excited because at that point I had realized that we had done the job that we were supposed to do. But at the same time, I was still disappointed because Nina was still gone.
Nina's killer has been convicted, but for Nina's family, there's no closure until her body is found and they can lay her to rest.
Right before Hans was going to be sentenced to the first-degree murder verdict, I met with him on the 4th of July in jail with Hans and his lawyer, and we reached an agreement that if you show me where Nina's body is and you waive all your appeal rights, I will agree with the court's permission to reduce the murder verdict from a first-degree murder to a second-degree murder. And he agreed.
As part of his plea bargain, Hans must also provide a full confession.
Hans said that after Nina came over and dropped the kids off, they got into a verbal dispute. And he said Nina looked at me in a way with a smile that I thought was sort of a smirk. And I struck her. And then he choked her to death with his bare hands.
On July 7th, 2008, Hans Reiser finally leads Paul Hora and the police to Nina's body. Handcuffed to his lawyer, he takes the search team into dense woodland, less than a mile from his house in the Oakland Hills.
Where she was located, we would have never found her.
Hans led us through the trails and finally to a location where Nina was. And he said, she's right there. And we started digging, and lo and behold, once we got, about 3 feet deep, inside the hole was Nina, but Nina was in a bag. And that bag was just as Rory had described to me in that picture that he had given me when he came to the United States to testify. And it was very chilling for me to see that.
The Hans Reiser case was Detective Ryan Gill's first murder investigation, and it proved to be too much. Not long afterward, he decided to leave the Oakland Police Department to work in a smaller, safer community.
One of the reasons I left missing persons was that this case just takes a lot out of you. And you start looking at every single missing person like it's the Reiser case. And I think it just stresses you out every time your phone rings.
Hans Reiser was sentenced to life in prison for second-degree murder. He will be eligible for parole in the year 2023.
He screwed everything up. He could have been doing very well making money, getting fame and fortune, and he totally screwed up and ruined a lot of lives.